Tonight, we turn the pages of an old story, one carved in marble and whispered in moonlight, a tale of gods and mortals, of beauty, betrayal, and a girl whose eyes could turn the world to stone. So, settle in. Let the night fall quiet around you. Let your thoughts drift like mist over ancient ruins. And listen, as we remember the name Medusa, not as a monster, but as a girl with a story the world tried to forget. There once was a temple by the sea. It stood alone on a cliff where the waves beat against the stone like a slow drum. White columns reached toward the sky, bleached by salt and time. Ivy crept up the walls, softening the edges of sacred architecture. The air smelled of myrrh, sea foam, and silence. Inside that temple, there lived a girl. Her name was Medusa. She was not a queen, nor a sorceress, nor anything larger than life. She was, in those days, only human, a priestess of the goddess Athena, chosen for her devotion and her beauty, both of which she wore as quietly as one might wear a shawl. Her days were gentle and ritual bound. She rose with the sun, washed her hands in sacred water, swept the floors, and lit the lamps. The villagers would come to the temple in the afternoons, bringing offerings and questions, baskets of olives, scrolls of prayers, wounds of the body and spirit alike. But sometimes they came only to see her, to steal a look. For Medusa was beautiful, beautiful in the way of moonlight on still water, not loud, not proud, just there, and impossible to look away from. Some whispered that Athena herself had carved Medusa from a dream, a living statue of piety and grace. Others said she was too lovely to remain mortal for long. Medusa did not hear those whispers, or perhaps she chose not to. Her world was one of quietness, of rituals and incense, of the hush that falls in holy places. She smiled rarely, but when she did, it warmed the whole room like a candle too close to the wick. But beauty, in that world, was not protection. It was invitation. In the evenings, when the temple emptied and the sea went black, Medusa would sit alone by the great statue of Athena. Towering above her, the goddess was carved with stern eyes and a bronze shield, forever in the posture of war. Medusa would kneel before her, not out of fear, but reverence. "I serve you," she would whisper. "May I remain pure in your sight." She meant it. She believed in the goddess, believed in justice, in wisdom, in the sacred silence of service. She had never questioned that faith. Not yet. Outside the temple walls, the world turned faster. Kings rose and fell. Wars brewed. Gods watched with half interest from the clouds. But on that lonely cliffside, time stood still. Medusa lit the lamps. She swept the floor. She prayed, and the sea watched her. Far below, where the foam licked the rocks, something ancient stirred. A current shifted. A presence tasted the air. Gods do not knock when they enter. That night, Medusa dreamed of waves. She was standing knee-deep in water, her white robe soaked and clinging to her skin. The sky above was dark, not storm dark, but bottomless, like the deep sea. She looked down and saw her reflection ripple. Her own eyes looked back at her. But behind them, something moved. She woke with the scent of salt in her lungs. Outside, the wind changed. The gulls fled the cliffs. The waves struck the shore harder than they should have. And on the horizon, something vast approached. Crowned not in stars, but foam. The girl of the temple slept, unaware. The sea god had seen her, and he was coming. The next morning, the air was heavy, the kind of heaviness that settled on the shoulders without warning, as if the wind itself had forgotten how to move. The gulls, normally shrieking over the waves, were silent. The olive trees beyond the cliffs stood still, their silver leaves unmoving, and in the temple the oil lamps burned lower than usual, their flames flickering as though unsure of the air they breathed. Medusa rose early, as she always did. She washed her hands. She pressed her fingers to her forehead in the shape of the owl, the mark of Athena. She began to sweep the marble steps, humming low to herself, a melody from childhood, long ago. But the bristles of the broom scraped louder than usual. The silence made everything louder. Outside, the tide came in farther than it should have. By midday the clouds had gathered, thick and low, but without storm. The ocean darkened, turning from pale blue to something deeper, green and shadowed, almost black in places. But no rain came, not yet. The villagers did not climb the hill to bring offerings that day. Something in the air warned them to stay away. Even the goats kept to the lower pastures, heads raised toward the windless sky. Medusa stood at the great bronze doors of the temple, looking out toward the sea. The breeze no longer touched her face. The scent of the waves was strong, too strong, thick as if the ocean had exhaled and held its breath. She felt it before she saw it. That shift in the world. That shiver in her spine that told her someone had crossed a line that should not be crossed. The goddess's statue behind her cast a long shadow. She turned to look up at it. The eyes carved in marble seemed sharper now, less kind. And then, he was there. No footsteps, no warning, just a presence, a ripple in the center of the sanctuary. She turned, and he stood where only the devoted were allowed, at the very heart of the temple, the altar behind him, sacred and cold. He was tall. His hair was dark, wet with sea brine, and tangled with strands of kelp. His eyes were pale as wave foam, too pale for any mortal face. His skin shimmered faintly with the sheen of water, though he stood dry and untouched by rain. He did not speak at first. He simply looked at her, the way a deep thing from the ocean might look at something drifting near. Curious, predatory, impossible to read. Medusa stood frozen, broom in hand. "You are the one they speak of," he said at last. His voice was calm, but it did not belong in that space. It echoed too far. It lingered too long. She said nothing. There was no one else in the temple. "You serve her," he said, nodding once toward the statue of Athena. Still, she didn't speak. Words felt wrong in that moment, like trying to sing beneath the sea. His smile was slow. "You are beautiful." She took a step back. Not from flattery, from knowing. This was not a man. This was a god who did not belong here, a god who should not be near the sacred flame. "This is a holy place," she whispered, more to herself than to him. He tilted his head. "So am I." There was no more speaking after that, only the closing of distance, only the hush of the temple, only the salt in the air, thick and impossible to breathe. What passed between them was not mortal, and when it ended, she was alone. The doors of the temple stood open. The sky above had turned slate grey. The sea returned to stillness, its violence spent. Medusa lay beneath the gaze of the goddess. Her robes were torn, her skin bruised, her lips silent. The great statue of Athena loomed above her, cast in bronze and judgment, spear forever raised. The lamps had gone out. The goddess did not move. The girl did not cry, but something in her, something quiet, something sacred, had gone still. The sea was still. Hours had passed, or maybe days. Time moved differently in the temple now, thick and heavy, like honey poured over marble. The world outside continued as it always had, Waves, wind, the passage of sun, but inside the temple something had shifted. The sacred air was broken. Medusa lay curled at the foot of the altar, her robe torn, her skin streaked with seawater and silence. Her hair was loose across the stone. Her body ached, not just in flesh, but in faith. She did not cry. There was a point past weeping, where the body folds into itself, and the spirit hides beneath the ribs. That's where she waited, small and still, as if the statue of Athena might not notice her. But the goddess always notices. It began with the sound of metal. Not a door, not a footstep, just a low, slow ringing, as if a distant bronze bell had been struck under water. Medusa opened her eyes. The room had darkened, though no clouds had passed. The shadows were longer, bending wrong. The flames of the unlit lamps flickered back into life without being touched. The statue of Athena had changed. Her expression, once cold but fair, had become unreadable. Her lips seemed tighter, her brow furrowed. The spear in her hand gleamed, and at her feet stood a figure, not the statue, not a vision, the goddess herself. Athena stood in silence, watching. Her form was tall, armored, perfect. Her face was not cruel, not yet, but hard, sculpted of something older than judgment. The owl mark on her helmet shimmered as though alive. Medusa tried to sit up, but her limbs were slow, as if they no longer belonged to her. She wanted to speak, to say, "He came uninvited. I did not call him. I did not want him." But no sound came. Only the echo of breath. Only the goddess, unmoved. Finally, Athena spoke. "This temple was mine." Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. It was sacred. Medusa looked up, mouth open, but no words could form. "You allowed him here," Athena said. The words fell like stones. Medusa shook her head slowly. Her hand rose, not in defense, but in disbelief. "I did not allow," but the goddess stepped forward. "You were chosen," she said. "You were meant to remain pure." The sentence stung more than any blade. The goddess saw the torn robe, the bruises, the stillness, and called it impurity. Medusa, breathless, whispered, "He is a god." Athena did not blink. "And I am your goddess. You should have resisted. You should have cried louder. You should have made war." The injustice split the air. Something inside Medusa cracked, not anger, not yet, but understanding. The world, it seemed, was not built for mercy, only obedience. Athena raised her hand. "You defiled the sanctuary," she said, "and for that, you shall wear the mark." The room changed. Light flickered like a dying fire. The air twisted cold. The lamps flared blue, and Medusa screamed, but not from pain, from becoming. It began at the scalp. Her hair, thick, dark, soft, writhed, lifted, twisted. Strands became cords. Cords became coils. Coils split. The first serpent rose, hissing softly, not in rage, but in recognition. Then came the next, and the next. Her head bloomed with them. Snakes, black and green, scaled and gleaming, eyes like distant stars. They moved with her thoughts. They were her thoughts. Her skin lost its warmth. Her cheeks hollowed. Her lips, once kissed by hymns, turned dark. Her pupils slit like blades. And the world, the sacred, lying world, became sharper. Athena stepped back, unmoved. "You shall never be touched again," she said. Medusa, trembling, lifted her eyes to the goddess. Athena's expression did not waver. "Your gaze will be death. Any man who looks upon you will be turned to stone. That is your curse. That is your shield. That is your sentence." Medusa stared. And though the snakes hissed in confusion, and the air pulsed with new power, She did not fall. She did not weep. Only nodded once, slowly. Not in agreement, but in comprehension. The goddess turned. Without another word, she vanished, into bronze, into air, into the cold nothing of gods who pass judgment and never return to see it through. The flames dimmed. The temple fell silent again. Medusa stood alone. Her hands shook. Her snakes curled gently around her shoulders, uncertain. She looked down at her reflection in a pool of spilled oil. A stranger looked back, but not a monster. Not yet. Only a girl the gods had chosen to abandon and shape into something they could fear. No one escorted her. There was no procession, no guard, no herald crying shame through the streets. Just the creak of a wooden boat pulling away from the shore. The oarsman's eyes fixed firmly downward, never daring a glance toward the girl in the bow. She sat wrapped in rough linen, hood drawn low, face hidden. Even now, before her power had taken its full shape, the air around her was tense, brittle, sharp. The sea gave her passage, but not gladly. None spoke. Even the birds stayed silent, circling high, uncertain. The island came into view at dawn. Not lush, not green, but pale and dry with jagged cliffs and low dust-covered trees clinging to cracks in stone. The shore was made of coarse sand and broken shells. Inland, there was no temple, no homes, no voices, only rock. The boat touched land. The men leapt back in, even before she stood. They left no supplies, no farewell. The oars thudded against water, and she watched them disappear into the morning haze, rowing as if fleeing a burning city. She turned slowly to face her new world, and walked inland, barefoot. The snakes whispered softly, not with words, not yet, but with motion. They shifted against each other like living braids, slithering down her back, curling over her ears, like garlands made of breath. They did not strike her. They did not bite. They belonged. As the sun rose higher, the ground grew hotter. Her feet blistered, then hardened. Her skin no longer burned beneath the sun. Her body changed, not all at once, but steadily, subtly, adapting in silence. Her bones no longer ached as they had. Her eyes did not blink in sandstorms. She found a cave that night, carved by centuries of forgotten wind, overlooking a wide stretch of flat, stony ground. She made no fire. She had no need. Her breath no longer fogged the air. Her hunger thinned. The world had begun to forget her, and she, in turn, began to forget the world. Days passed, or weeks. Time became untethered. She did not count the hours. She did not mark the walls. Instead, she listened to the wind, to the hiss of sand over stone, to the rasp of snake scale across her shoulder, to the small voice inside that had once whispered prayers to Athena, now silent. At night, she dreamed of marble halls and empty altars, of footsteps behind her that never arrived, of waves licking at her feet and the taste of salt in her throat. Occasionally, animals wandered close. Wild goats, desert birds, insects. They did not turn to stone. Only men, it seemed, bore the curse. The goats stared, wary but calm. The birds perched in the trees above, watching with tilted heads. One snake slithered free from her and joined the brush, hunting and returning, curled lovingly around her wrist. She stopped speaking entirely. There was no one to hear her voice. The silence suited her now. The girl who once lit sacred lamps was gone. In her place, something new was forming. One night, under a thin crescent moon, she stood at the edge of a cliff and looked down at the sea. The same sea that had carried her here. The same waves that had once brought him. Her reflection shimmered in the black water below. snakes moving slowly in the wind, eyes dark as wet stone, lips no longer trembling. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She reached up, gently stroked the serpent behind her ear. It hissed, soft, like a sigh. "Is this what you wanted?" she whispered into the open night. The wind did not answer, but something inside her did. The next morning she etched a line in the stone outside her cave with a sharpened piece of bone. Then another. Then another. She would not keep track of time. She would keep track of change. And far away, beyond the sea, in a temple untouched by sand or silence, the statue of Athena remained. Cold, still, watching, as if remembering what she had done, or trying to forget it. Medusa sat alone on her cliff, no longer mourning, no longer praying, just breathing, just being, just becoming. It had been a long time since footsteps echoed across the island. They came at dusk, faint, cautious, deliberate. Medusa was sitting beneath a low tree, sharpening a stone against another. Not because she needed a weapon, but because the sound of it grounded her. The snakes stirred before she did, heads lifting, tongues flicking the air. Someone had arrived. She did not stand. She did not panic. She merely lowered the stones to her lap and listened. The footsteps grew louder. A man's gait. He was coming toward the cliff. She could smell the fear before she saw him. It came ahead of him, carried in sweat and breath, in the too quick rhythm of footsteps and the tightness of his lungs. She knew that kind of fear. Not the panic of prey, but the performance of bravery. The kind men wear like armor before it cracks. He stepped into view, a young traveler. Leather tunic, curved blade at his hip, hair wind-tossed, sand in his beard. Not a warrior, not really, but a man trying to become one. He froze when he saw her. She was sitting in plain view. No ambush, no hiss, just presence. And yet, he stumbled back. He reached for his blade but didn't draw it. Not yet. Medusa looked at him. Not harshly, not cruelly, just looked. She had grown used to stillness. This movement, this stuttering presence was loud, unsettling. The man's hand trembled on the hilt of his weapon. His eyes flitted to her snakes, which had begun to rise and sway, alert, curious, silent. He tried to speak. You're the witch, he said, voice hoarse. She said nothing. You're her, the one they said. He stopped, swallowed hard. Medusa rose, slowly. Her bare feet brushed the dust. She didn't lunge, didn't approach. Only stood, tall and quiet, as the last light of day stretched long shadows across the stones. Don't look at me, the man said suddenly, stepping back. They said not to meet your eyes. She tilted her head. The snakes shifted, some coiling into her hair, others watching him like a dozen blinking sentinels. He lowered his gaze, to her feet, to the ground, and drew his sword. I don't want to hurt you, he muttered. Medusa nearly smiled. Not cruelly, just tiredly, because she had heard those words before. She did not move, not even when he stepped closer. She did not scream, or curse, or plead. She only lifted her gaze when he raised his sword. High, shaky, uncertain. And in that moment, he looked. His face changed first. Eyes wide, lips parting as if to shout something. A warning, a prayer, a curse. But no sound came. His skin turned pale, then grey, then pale again. But this time the pallor of cold stone creeping up from his throat to his scalp. His sword dropped to the dust with a dull thud. He froze mid-step, one leg forward, one arm half raised, mouth open, forever. A statue now. The snakes stilled. The wind blew gently across the rocks, and Medusa exhaled. Not in triumph, not in sorrow, just breath, heavy, inevitable. She stepped closer, circling him once. He was still warm, the transformation recent. The stone was smooth, perfect, preserved in every detail. The worry line in his brow, the salt crust on his beard, the hesitation in his pose. He had not come to understand her. He had come to kill her. And he had failed. She left the statue standing there, facing the sea. A monument, a warning, a beginning. Later she returned with a scrap of cloth, draped it over his shoulders. Not to mourn him, but to mark him, the first of many. The garden had begun. That night the stars were clearer than they had been in weeks. Medusa sat beside her cave, the serpents coiled around her shoulders like sleeping birds. She did not speak, but if she had, she might have said, "You call it a curse. I call it quiet." They began to arrive one by one, not in armies, not in droves, just men, drifters, warriors, mercenaries, heroes in waiting, all drawn to the island by rumour, by myth, by the promise of glory. Some believed they'd find a monster. Others hoped for a cursed woman who could be saved with a sword or a kiss. None expected to become statues. The second one came under cover of night. He was clever, wore mirrored plates over his armour, held a cloth over his eyes, moved silently between rocks and thorn bushes, thinking himself a shadow, a slayer of darkness. Medusa watched him from above, her snakes quiet, pressed flat against her skin, like ivy on old stone. She did not move. She did not need to. He looked up, just once to check his bearings, and that was enough. Stone bloomed across his face like frost. He froze mid-step, half crouched, dagger raised, the folds of his cloak caught in an invisible wind. She did not drag him away. She left him where he stood. She was building something now. Over the weeks that followed, more came. They came armed, came hungry, came hopeful. They brought swords, mirrors, blindfolds, blessings. They brought oaths, prayers, even love poems. One foolish boy had carved her name into his arm before he stepped onto the island, calling himself her deliverer. They all turned to stone, some near the cliffs, others closer inland, a few just outside her cave, mouths open in mid-command, weapons fallen mid-swing. They did not scream. They barely had time. Stone is fast, and mercy, she found, was slower. Medusa began to tend the bodies, not with reverence, not with sorrow, with care. She wiped dust from their faces when the wind got bad. She tied scraps of cloth around their necks or shoulders to keep the birds away. She learned to move around them in the mornings, checking for cracks caused by the cold. They were no longer her enemies. They were, what? Witnesses? Proof? Companions? She didn't ask the question out loud. But sometimes, when the stars were bright and the snakes had all gone quiet, she sat beside one of them. An older man who'd arrived with a spear and sandals far too thin for the journey, and she whispered, "You shouldn't have come." Time passed. Her feet grew harder. Her skin thickened in places where the sun never used to reach. Her body forgot softness. The snakes grew larger, not grotesque, not monstrous, just healthy, protective. One of them, pale green with a speckled pattern down its spine, began to curl around her wrist when she walked, like a living bracelet. She named it Echo, not because it spoke, but because it always returned. The garden grew. That's what it had become, though no flowers bloomed. Stone men stood like crooked trees, caught in poses they never chose. Some knelt, some raised blades. One sat on a rock, forever mid-thought, as if trying to remember something lost. Moss grew on their shoulders. Lichen bloomed across their brows. Medusa began to place things around them. Pebbles arranged in spirals. Feathers from birds that landed and left again. Shells from the beach. Not offerings. Not grief. Just company. No one sent men after them. The world did not care where they went, only that they did not return. One evening, she found a helmet at the shore. Cracked, abandoned, rusted around the edges. She turned it over and found a name carved inside, faded but legible. She added it to the stone nearest the cave, propped it on a shoulder, whispered the name once, then let it go. She did not remember the men for who they were. She remembered them for how still they had become, and far, far away, in taverns and temples, bards began to sing of her. They called her the Gorgon. They spoke of a cursed island where no man returned, where a serpent-haired beast waited with eyes like knives and a soul made of black glass. They did not tell the story of the girl, only the monster. And Medusa, standing barefoot beneath the moonlight, watching her garden grow, smiled faintly, not with joy, not with cruelty, just understanding. If I am to be their nightmare, she whispered to the wind, then let me be unforgettable. It began with a scent, not of blood, not of rot, of something older, iron and salt, an old sky. Medusa was sitting near the edge of the garden, weaving a crown of dry reeds and bones, a quiet ritual she'd made for herself, when the snakes lifted their heads all at once. Their bodies grew still. Tongues flicked the air. She followed their gaze. There, on the far side of the cliffs, where no path should lead, stood two figures. They didn't walk. They arrived. The wind shifted. The birds scattered. Even the statues seemed to tilt slightly away from them, not in fear, but in reverence. They were not like the men who came before. They were not men at all. Stheno and Uriel, her sisters. Not sisters by blood of womb, but by blood spilled, by ancient shaping. They were older than time's counting, born before memory, before the seas had names. The world had called them monsters, long before it knew what a monster truly was. Stheno, the eldest, wide-eyed and unblinking, her skin the colour of old copper, her mouth stitched with scars she had never tried to hide. Uriel, the middle, tall and narrow-faced, with black veins that shimmered faintly beneath her skin, like lightning trapped under glass. Her eyes wept blood, not constantly, just often enough. They did not smile when they saw Medusa. They did not run to her, or cry, or touch her face. They only stood still, and that, she understood, was love. Medusa rose. Her snakes lifted. Some hissed, others curled back down again, soft and unsure. Stheno spoke first. "You've grown quiet." Medusa nodded. Uriel tilted her head, studying the statues that stood in crooked rows behind her. "We heard the stories," she murmured. "The songs." Medusa said nothing. "They got the shape wrong," Stheno added, stepping closer. "They always do." They sat together as the sun fell. No fire was lit. No words were needed. They shared a silence that was not empty, but old, worn in, like a robe passed down through ages. The snakes on their heads whispered to one another, or perhaps to the wind, trading stories without language. Medusa offered them water from a stone basin she had carved herself. They drank. They stayed, not for a night, but for a while. They did not question her garden. They did not mourn it, or mock it, or seek to fix it. Instead, Uriel traced her fingers over one of the stone warrior's cheekbones and said softly, "You froze him mid-prayer." Medusa looked away. "He was asking his god for protection," Uriel went on, "and found yours instead." no judgment, just truth. Stheno began to carve symbols into the rocks outside the cave, not to mark territory, not to ward off intruders, but to remind the land who walked here now. Old runes, language no longer spoken, older than Olympus, a warning and a welcome, all in one. The island responded. The wind thickened, the soil hardened, the birds flew wider circles around the cliff. The island, it seemed, knew its daughters had returned. In the days that followed, they settled into a rhythm. Stheno hunted, not for food, but for motion. She chased shadows across the hills, fought with the wind, wrestled stones loose from the cliffs, and laughed when they shattered. Urili sang to the statues at night. Her voice was low, filled with cracks and echoes, like water dripping in forgotten caves. Medusa watched. She had not felt like a sister in so long. She had forgotten what it meant not to be alone. One evening, Stheno found her sitting near the edge of the cliff. "You're quiet," she said again. "I've forgotten how to speak," Medusa replied. "You never needed to," Stheno said. "Your silence says more than their temples ever did." Medusa looked out toward the sea. "I used to pray. We all did. I used to think the gods would listen." "They did," Stheno said, resting a heavy hand on her shoulder. "And that's why you are what you are." Medusa didn't ask why they came. She didn't need to. Sisters feel when the world has turned too far. They arrive not to fix, not to heal, but to stand beside. The world called them monsters, but here, in this garden of stone and silence, they were home. And so the island changed again. No longer a place of exile, no longer a prison, but a sanctuary for the unwanted, the unloved, the unlooked upon. A place where even cursed sisters could rest for a while beneath a sky that had, finally, stopped watching. Far from the silence of the island, Olympus burned with light. Not firelight, not warmth, but ambition. White marble towers gleamed in the sun, clean and perfect, high above the mortal world. From the clouds below, it looked like heaven. But from within, it was a palace of whispers. And today, those whispers had a name. Medusa. The gods did not speak of her often. Not aloud. She was a footnote, a forgotten curse, a tool once used and discarded. But now, she was becoming a problem. Not just a story, not just a caution, but a power. Men were going missing. Entire patrols of hired swords vanished without return. Sailors swore they saw statues rising on distant cliffs. Warriors frozen mid-run. Swords half raised. Screams caught forever behind stone lips. Mortals whispered her name like a ghost. The Gorgon. The cursed one. The woman who should not have survived. Athena watched it unfold from her high throne. She said nothing, but her fingers tightened on the edge of her shield, the one she now carried with pride, etched with the face she had once cursed. Medusa's head, engraved in divine bronze, was mounted there like a trophy, cold, motionless, safe. But she could feel it, the tremor in the myth, the story beginning to twist back. In the hall of assembly, the gods gathered. Zeus, bright-eyed and grinning, lounged with a goblet in hand, always amused by mortal things. Hermes, restless, spun a dagger on the table, his winged sandals tapping against marble. Apollo played idle notes on a silver lyre, bored but listening. Athena stood. "She grows too bold," she said. Zeus chuckled. "You made her." "I corrected her, then let her fade." "She's not fading," Athena said coldly. "She's growing." A pause. The gods turned their attention, if only briefly. "She has sisters with her now," Athena went on. "Creatures older than even us. The Gorgons. "Ah, yes," Hermes murmured. "The ones who bleed stone and speak in riddles. Delightful company." "She turns men to statues," Apollo said, finally interested. "Even their souls don't pass through my halls." "They're trapped," Zeus raised an eyebrow. "So?" "Mortals die every day." "They're not dying," Athena said. "They're being claimed." That silenced the room. Power among gods was not in temples or prayers. It was in stories, in what mortals believed, in what was feared or worshipped, or both. Medusa was becoming more than cursed. She was becoming divine, a deity of vengeance, of stone, of the seen and the silenced, and that Olympus could not allow. "She must be slain," Athena said. "And who would do it?" Hermes asked. "You?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "No god can face her," Athena admitted. "The laws forbid it." "Convenient law," Hermes smirked. Athena ignored him. "We need a mortal." So they made one, or rather, chose one. A young man, strong of jaw and story, descended from Zeus himself, though barely more than a boy. Perseus, raised on myths, fed on dreams, eager to be worthy of songs he hadn't earned yet. They whispered to him, gave him omens, spun riddles into his sleep. Then, one morning, as the sun rose over the Aegean, he awoke with a quest already in his mouth. "Find the Gorgon," he said, to no one in particular, "and bring me her head." Athena, ever generous, gifted him a polished shield, one that gleamed like a still lake. Hermes gave him a curved blade, thin and cruel, carved from shadowed steel. Hades, quietly amused, offered a helmet that made its wearer unseen. Even the nymphs, long removed from the affairs of gods, gave him winged sandals and a satchel woven to hold death without leaking. They dressed him in gifts, then named him Hero, and sent him forth to slay what they had made. Not to bring peace, not to save the world, but to clean the mirror, to scrub the story, to cut off the head of a truth too heavy to carry. And across the sea, on a quiet cliff beneath the moon, Medusa did not yet know his name, but she felt it, in her bones, in the way the wind curled wrong that morning, in how the snakes stirred restlessly, even while they slept. Something had been sent, and this time it would not look away. The sea was calm the day Perseus arrived. It offered no warning, no storm, no omen, only silence. The island did not fight him. It watched. Even the wind held its breath. He landed near dusk. His sandals touched the shore with no sound at all. Winged and soft, gifted by nymphs who would forget his name before the moon was high. He was young, muscled, dressed in armor too fine for his age. His eyes were wide with purpose, but not understanding. His sword was already drawn, curved, polished, divine. His shield, a mirror, polished so smooth it reflected the world perfectly. Backward. The blade hung at his side, but it was the mirror he watched. Not the path, not the wind, not the dying sun. Only the mirror. The island narrowed around him. Trees twisted subtly out of his way. Rocks shifted just slightly, guiding him upward. Even the air bent, subtly pushing him toward the cliff. It was not magic. It was fate. At the top of the cliff, in the hollow she called home, Medusa was sleeping. Her sisters had left hours earlier, Stheno to hunt, Euryale to walk the ridges. They trusted the land now, trusted that no one would dare. But the gods do not knock, and Perseus did not come through the front. He crept through the shadows, with the helmet of invisibility tight upon his brow. He stepped past the statues without looking at them. He saw them only as threats, not as warnings, not as men. She was lying beneath the stone arch of her cave, the snakes half dreaming, their bodies heavy and slow with heat. Her arms were folded, her breath was steady. Her chest rose and fell with the kind of peace only found far from judgment. Perseus did not see her face, only the reflection, a flicker in the mirror, a shape, a thing. He did not call her name. He did not speak. He did not offer her a chance to wake, to rise, to look him in the eyes. He moved behind her, just as he had been instructed, feet silent on the stone, and in a single motion, he raised the blade and struck. The snake screamed, not loud, not wild, high, sharp, brief, then silent. The body slumped forward. The head rolled softly to the side, and from her blood, not seconds later, rose Pegasus, white and winged, shining with myth, untouched by grief. And beside him, Kreischer, a golden giant who stood briefly, looked at the sea, and walked away into nothing. Born of violence, born of silence, born from a womb that never chose. Perseus wrapped the head in the cloth the gods had given him. He did not look at it. Even now, even severed, her face could still turn stone from flesh. He did not weep. He did not wonder. He had done what was asked. The gods had promised him glory, and all it cost was a woman he never met. By the time Sthena returned, the cave was cold. By the time Euryale found the trail, it was gone. They screamed. The kind of scream that rips the clouds. The kind of scream that cracks stone. The kind that wakes the statues. But it was too late. The island was empty. The garden, abandoned. The head, stolen. And the world would remember only one version of the tale. A hero, a monster, a victory. Not a sleeping girl, not a mirror, not a blade in the dark. Her body cooled beneath the cave's arch. No storm came. No lightning split the sky. No god cried out in remorse. The world was quiet, but it was listening. Her blood soaked the stone. It ran in slow rivulets over the floor. Thick and dark, not red, not mortal. Something in it shimmered like metal, something older than veins. Where it touched the earth, the island stirred. From one pool of it, a shape began to rise. A neck, wings, eyes like wind over water. Pegasus. The winged horse, breathless and glowing, shook the last of blood from his mane. His hooves touched ground, but not truly. He was already myth, already skybound. He looked around once, not in grief, in recognition, and took flight. From another stream of her blood, a second figure emerged, heavier, slower, golden. Kreischer, the warrior born whole, sword already in hand. He did not speak. He did not stay. He walked toward the sea, never looking back. Some say he disappeared into the west. Others say he became a king, but none say he wept. And yet her blood kept spilling. It touched the rocks and things began to grow where nothing had grown for centuries. Twisted beasts, thorned serpents, flowers with teeth. Even as her flesh cooled, the earth remembered her. In far lands, soldiers turned to stone mid-sentence. A tyrant reached for a goblet and froze. A king's horses reared, panicked, and shattered against marble. They never saw her, never met her eyes. But her head was still looking, wrapped in sacred cloth, held in the satchel of a god-kissed boy. Her gaze still hunted. Perseus, cautious even in triumph, never unwrapped her unless commanded. And when he did, entire armies fell in seconds. He paraded her head before kings, and they knelt. He turned monsters to rubble, nations to statues. And all the while, the face inside the cloth remained unchanged. Lips parted in sleep, snakes curled in frozen breath, eyes open, watching, not in hate, in endurance. He reached his final destination, Athena's temple, with a satchel heavy and gods already waiting. They received him with song. they crowned him with laurel. They praised his courage, they never said her name. Athena took the head herself. She did not look directly. Even she, the goddess who cursed her, still feared what had become of her. She mounted the head upon her shield, the aegis, and from that day on, her enemies turned to stone before battle even began. They said it was divine power, but really, it was hers. Medusa's face, her silence, her fury, her stillness, became a weapon in the hands of the very ones who silenced her. But her story did not sleep. It bled into rock, into sea, into shadow. Far from Olympus, in the places between cities, strange things began to happen. Women with snake-braided hair gave birth without pain. Children were born with golden eyes and could command silence with a glance. Some claimed to see a pale shape on the cliffs, watching, not walking, crowned in serpents. They called her a ghost, a curse, a mother of monsters. They never called her what she truly was, a seed. Because what the gods forgot, what the hero never knew, what even her sisters could not stop, was that death is not the end of myth. It's only the first breath. The head did not rot. It did not fade. It did not decay as a mortal head should. Wrapped in sacred cloth, soaked in divine oils, the face of Medusa remained untouched, eternal in death, eternal in expression. The snakes frozen in mid-hiss, the lips parted slightly as though caught mid-word, and the eyes always open. Athena bore it with pride, not in her hand, not dangling from a chain, but mounted, centered, embedded in the aegis, her shield, forged anew for this purpose. No longer an emblem of strategy or wisdom, but a weapon of dread. Where once the owl had rested, the symbol of silent knowledge, now sat the severed head of a mortal woman, wielded by the very goddess who had made her into myth. In battle, it was devastating. Enemies dropped their weapons at the first glimpse. Some turned to stone before they could draw breath. Others tried to run, only to find their legs no longer moving, their lungs frozen. The shield did not strike. It simply looked, and the world obeyed. No one dared speak of it to Athena. No one asked if it troubled her. She moved through the halls of Olympus with her spear in hand and her Gorgon-faced shield gleaming. But the servants whispered. They said she covered it at night, that she turned it inward sometimes, toward the wall, that she flinched once, just once, when she caught her own reflection in polished bronze. It was not guilt. Athena did not feel guilt. It was presence. Medusa was not gone. She was there, in the shield, in the silence, in the way Athena sometimes paused during victory chants, as if listening for a voice that would never return. One day, deep in the mountain city of Phthia, Athena led a charge against a rebel demigod. The enemy army fell quickly, frozen in moments by the gaze of the Gorgon's head. Statues littered the field, stone arms still reaching, stone mouths still open. A battlefield turned to a mausoleum in a heartbeat, and yet, in the quiet after the storm, Athena wandered among them. She stopped at one, a young woman, hands raised not in defense, but in pleading, her eyes wide, her posture full of life caught too late. And for a moment, Athena saw her again. Not the warrior, not the shield, but the girl in white robes, kneeling, praying, waiting to be protected. She turned the shield face down and did not speak for a long while. The other gods noticed. Zeus asked no questions. Hermes smirked but said nothing. Apollo hummed songs that ended too soon. But the mortals below Olympus, they noticed everything. They began to fear the face more than the goddess. Temples painted the aegis on walls, not as a holy image, but as a warning. Doors were marked with a single eye. Children were told to never stare too long at polished water. She is still looking, they whispered, even from the shield. Athena's image changed, no longer a goddess of justice, but of judgment, unyielding, unblinking, unforgiving. In private, Athena sat alone in her temple, shield propped against the wall. The firelight flickered over Medusa's face. The mouth did not move, the eyes did not blink, but they said everything, not in sound, in presence, in refusal to disappear. There are no tombs for women like her, no temples, no chants, no offerings, only weaponry, only the myth of her death, only a face that cannot be forgotten or buried because it has become a mirror, not of power, but of what the gods do when no one is watching. It began in dreams, far from Olympus, far from the blood-slicked marble of the temples and the whitewashed tales of men. Girls began to dream of her, not of her scream, not of her death, not even of her face. They dreamed of stillness, of open eyes that saw everything, of hair that writhed and whispered, like a mother's hand in the dark. Some awoke weeping, some awoke silent, but none awoke the same. In a desert town near the edge of the known world, a child refused to speak for 7 days after her dream. When she finally opened her mouth, she said only, she wasn't a monster. She was a mirror. And then she drew a face in the dirt. A woman with snakes for hair. Eyes too large to blink. In the mountain villages, where the old gods had gone quiet, the priests found shrines defaced. Not vandalized, changed. Statues of Athena now bore cracks. Faces softened into other shapes. And in one village, her spear had snapped in two, not by weather nor tool, just broken. No one had claimed responsibility. But in the walls behind the altars, etched in a language no one taught anymore, someone had written, "She still sees you." At night, women began to gather in secret. They did not wear robes. They did not sing hymns. They did not name themselves. They only sat in circles, around fires, their backs to the gods. One would speak. When I was 12, a man followed me into the olive grove, and she would not need to finish, because another would say, I know, and another would whisper, she saw. Then the circle would go quiet, not in fear, but in recognition. They began to mark their doors, not with Medusa's face, with the eye, singular, slit-pupilled, unblinking, a sign, not to intruders, to each other. Meanwhile, the aegis remained in Athena's care, her shield of war, her weapon of fear. It was said that none could meet its gaze and live. But in truth, Athena rarely uncovered it now. Not because it failed her, but because she felt it watching back. The face did not change, but the air around it did. Heavier, fuller, almost aware. A silence that wasn't absence, a stillness that listened. In cities where Perseus was once praised, his statues began to crack. Not all at once, not dramatically, just splinters, just shifts. The marble of his sword hand would fall first, then the nose, then the eyes, hollowed out overnight. Stonemasons tried to repair them, but the breaks returned, over and over again, until finally the city stopped trying. And in a distant forest, where no map reached, a woman with hair like coiled vines and a voice that hummed like wind through teeth stood before a still pool. Her reflection did not frighten her. It spoke, not in sound, in presence, and the snakes on her shoulders lifted, not in defense, but in greeting. You were not the first, the reflection seemed to say. You will not be the last. They called it a cult, a strange sisterhood of silence. They feared it, of course, because it had no temples, no leaders, no prayers, only eyes and memory. The name they used was never spoken, only understood. But in some places, when the wind curled just right, when the moon hovered over cliffs too steep for goats, someone might whisper it. Stone-willed, snake-crowned, she who was betrayed, Medusa. She was not back, not fully, not yet. But the world remembered her now, not as a monster, as a warning. The aegis hung in darkness. Athena no longer displayed it on temple walls, no longer carried it openly into battle. She claimed it was sacred now, too powerful, too holy, reserved only for the gravest of threats. But in truth she had begun to fear its silence, because the head within did not decay. It did not shift. It did not weep. It did not sleep. But it dreamed. Not like mortals. Not in colours or words or scenes. It dreamed in pressure, in the weight of things unsaid, in the ache of betrayal carved into divine muscle, in the pulse of memory lodged behind eyelids that would never close again. Medusa had no lungs anymore, no voice, no blood, but her mind, what the gods thought they had severed, curled inward and stayed awake. In the beginning, the dreams were simple. Stone halls, snake hisses, echoes of the temple long gone. But slowly, as centuries passed and battle after battle used her face like a threat, the dreams began to change. They turned sharper, brighter, alive. She saw herself, whole, unchained, not beautiful, not again, but complete, not walking through halls, but through cities that had once burned her name. And the people did not run. They bowed. The shield trembled sometimes. Subtle vibrations, dismissed by servants as battle aftershock. But the goddess knew better. She felt it when she held it too long. She dreamed too, but hers were shallow. The kind of dreams born from guilt she would never admit. In one such dream, Athena stood at the edge of a cliff, the wind still, the sky empty. And behind her came the faint scrape of bare feet on stone. Not marching, not charging, just arriving. She turned in the dream and saw nothing. But the sound lingered. Elsewhere, mortals who had touched the aegis in battle began to speak of visions. One soldier claimed the shield whispered. Another said he saw eyes blink inside it. A third swore a single snake moved before turning still again. Most were silenced. A few disappeared. But the stories rippled. The Gorgon still lives, they whispered in taverns. Not in body, but in stone inside the shield. Medusa dreamed deeper. She dreamed of walking, not alone, but with others. Stheno, Euryale, girls with eyes like hers. Boys born into fear, but refusing it. She dreamed of their hands touching the shield, not in worship, in release. She dreamed of the cloth unwrapping, of a gaze no longer bound by bronze. She dreamed of breath, not in lungs, in the world. And the snakes? They dreamed too. Curled in eternal scream, they began to feel something again. Not hunger, movement. One night, deep in Athena's hidden chamber, a single crack formed on the edge of the aegis. It was small, hairline, but the goddess stared at it for a very long time. And somewhere, far from Olympus, a child woke from a dream she did not understand, her hair damp with sweat. She looked into her polished cup of water, saw her own reflection, and behind it, for just a moment, eyes, watching, knowing, waiting. The head did not rot, it remembered, and now it dreamed with purpose, not to return, but to reform. It did not begin with thunder. It began with a hairline crack, in a shield no mortal hand had ever touched, in a room no mortal eyes had ever seen. The Aegis, Athena's sacred weapon, the bearer of the Gorgon's head, had been hanging untouched for years, watched, feared, ignored, until the bronze split, just a little. No sound, no quake, only a sliver of darkness between seams, and inside the shield, the dreaming stopped. Somewhere deep within Olympus, Athena awoke before dawn. No dream had stirred her, only the absence of one. The moment her eyes opened, the room felt wrong, the air thick, the flame in her sacred bowl flickering sideways, as if breathing. She stood, approached the shield, and found the crack, thin as spider silk, but widening. By the hour, she touched the rim with 2 fingers. The metal felt warm, no, alive. A heartbeat beneath it, a memory pulsing against divine craftsmanship. Athena said nothing. She did not call the others, because to speak of it would make it real. Far from Olympus, the world responded, not loudly, softly, subtly. A temple wall in Thebes collapsed without wind. Underneath the rubble, a mural was found, centuries older than the temple itself. A woman with serpent hair, not snarling, not monstrous, just watching. Her eyes not turned away, but forward, into the future. A storm in the Western Isles swept inland, leaving entire hills scoured clean. And beneath one, they found a statue, not carved but formed as if someone had been caught mid-step in stone. She looked not terrified, but calm. A girl, a shield, a gaze that had outlived empires. In a city long drowned, Devers found a medallion buried under coral and rust. It bore no god's name, only an eye, unblinking, etched into gold. They left it on the seafloor, but by morning it was gone. Whispers returned, not spoken, felt. Among the stone-willed, the scattered, dreaming, watching daughters of myth, a pulse ran through the blood, like static in the ribs, a signal. "She moves," said one woman, waking in a cave where no light had entered for days. "She watches," said another, her fingertips twitching in sleep. "She's not done," whispered a child who had never heard the name Medusa before. And beneath it all, in the shield that had held her, muted her, worn her like a war mask, a new crack appeared, right between the brows. No scream, no roar, but movement. The snakes, long petrified, twitched, just once, then again, then opened their eyes. In temples, torches flickered. In dreams, statues turned their heads slightly. In the minds of gods, something old and inconvenient stirred, something they had buried beneath steel and silence. Not vengeance, not wrath, correction. The stories had called her monster, victim, curse. Now they would have to call her something else, because she was no longer waiting, no longer dreaming. She was rising, and somewhere in the dark spaces of the world, at the edge of a cliff where the sea forgets its name, bare footsteps whispered over stone. One step, then another, and the stars blinked, uncertain. She walked barefoot, not with thunder, not with a storm behind her, not with armies, just with presence. The ground did not shake, the sky did not split, but the world knew she had returned. On a forgotten cliff, beneath a sky that had long since stopped watching, Medusa stood, whole. Not beautiful in the way the bards once lied, not monstrous in the way the gods once claimed, just herself. Her hair moved in slow waves, the snakes calm, woven into her like memory. Her skin bore no scars, her face no expression but clarity. Her eyes, ever open. She was not reborn. She had never truly left. Her death had been a silence written by others. Her survival, a whisper too long ignored. But now, the whisper had grown into form. Not vengeance, not forgiveness, just presence. Across the world, things shifted. In a temple in Athens, a statue of Athena cracked, not shattered, just split neatly through the face. The aegis crumbled in its hand, the engraved Gorgon fading as though released. On the edge of a battlefield in Thessaly, soldiers stopped mid-charge, every man frozen not by gaze but by uncertainty. Because the sky had darkened and something was watching that wasn't God, wasn't wind, wasn't nameable. The stone-willed gathered in cities and wastelands and whispered, "She walks." Not beneath, beside, not curse, crown. They did not chant. They did not kneel. They mirrored her, and in doing so became many-eyed, many-named, many-faced. Some wore serpents woven into their hair. Others carved stones into the shape of open mouths. None bowed, because she never had. Olympus said nothing. Athena did not answer the prayers written in fear. Perseus's name began to vanish from songs, too awkward to speak now. A man who killed in sleep, who struck from mirrors, who never knew her face. They called him a hero, but her silence had outlasted him. Her silence had become louder than his story. She walked through fields of old statues. Her garden, her beginning. Some still stood, weathered and crumbling. She did not mourn them. She nodded and kept walking. Not to the throne, not to the altar, to the places between, the cracks where truth hides, where myths are buried, where girls were once told to look down and pray not to be seen. She stood there now and looked back, and the world saw her, truly, for the first time. Not as monster, not as warning, not as tool, but as mirror. The Gorgon was not death. She was recognition of pain, of power, of what happens when the gods make a weapon out of a woman and forget that weapons remember who forged them. She is not gone. She is not waiting. She is not anyone's anymore. She is wake, the trail left behind after something deep has passed through the water. She is gaze, unblinking, undeniable. She is story, told in full this time, and now she is free.